Hello everyone. You are listening to this audiobook on channel Voice of Purpose by NSS IT Bombay.
Chapter 1, Part 4. It was by the little watercourse in the moors on the slope under the hanging rock that March met his new friend Fisher by appointment, shortly after the ugly and almost grotesque scene that had broken up the group in the garden. It was a monkey trick of mine, observed Fisher, gloomily, putting phosphorus on the target, but the only chance to make him jump was to give him the horrors suddenly. And when he saw the face he had shot at shining on the target he practiced on, all lit up with an infernal light, he did jump. Quite enough for my own intellectual satisfaction. "I'm afraid I don't quite understand even now," said March, "exactly what he did or why he did it." "You ought to," replied Fisher, with his rather dreary smile, "for you gave me the first suggestion yourself." "Oh yes, you did, and it was a very shrewd one. You said a man wouldn't take sandwiches with him to dine at a great house. It was quite true, and the inference was that, though he was going there, he didn't mean to dine there, or at any rate that he might not be dining there. It occurred to me at once that he probably expected to visit to be unpleasant, or the reception doubtful, or something that would prevent his accepting hospitality. Then it struck me that Turnbull was a terror to certain shady characters in the past, and that he had come down to identify and denounce one of them. The chances at the start pointed out the host, that is, Jenkins. I am morally certain now that Jenkins was the undesirable alien Turnbull wanted to convict in another shooting affair. But you see, the shooting gentleman had another shot in his locker. "But you said he would have to be a very good shot," protested March. "Jenkins is a very good shot," said Fisher. "A very good shot who can pretend to be a very bad shot. Shall I tell you the second hint I hit on after yours to make me think it was Jenkins? It was my cousin's account of his bad shooting. He had shot a cockade off a hat and a weathercock off a building. Now, in fact, a man must shoot very well indeed to shoot so badly as that. He must shoot very neatly to hit the cockade and not the head or even the hat. If the shots had really gone at random, the chances are 1,000 to 1 that they would have not hit such prominent and picturesque objects. They were chosen because they were prominent and picturesque objects. They make a story to go the round of society. He keeps the crooked weathercock in the summerhouse to perpetuate the story of a legend. And then he lay in wait with his evil eye and wicked gun, safely ambushed behind the legend of his own incompetence. But there is more than that. There is the summerhouse itself. There's the whole thing. There's all that Jenkins gets chaffed about. The gilding and the gaudy colors and all the vulgarity that's supposed to stamp him as an upstart. Now, as a matter of fact, upstarts generally don't do this. God knows there's enough of them in society, and one knows them well enough. And this is the very last thing they do. They're generally only too keen to know the right thing and do it, and they instantly put themselves body and soul into the hands of art decorators and art experts who do the whole thing for them. There's hardly another millionaire alive who has the moral courage to have a gilt monogram on a chair like that one in the gun room. For that matter, there's the name as well as the monogram. Names like Tompkins and Jenkins and Jenks are funny without being vulgar. They are vulgar without being common. If you prefer it, they are the commonplace without being common. They are just names to be chosen to look ordinary, but they are really rather extraordinary. Do you know how many people call Tompkins? It's a good deal rarer than Talbot. It's pretty much the same with the comic clothes of the Pervenu. Jenkins dresses like a character in punk, but that's because he's a character in punk. He's a fictitious character. He's a fabulous animal. He doesn't exist. Have you ever considered what it must be like to be a man who doesn't exist? To be a man with a fictitious character that he has to keep up at the expense not merely of personal talents? To be a new kind of hypocrite hiding a talent in a new kind of napkin. This man has chosen his hypocrisy very ingeniously. It was a really new one, a subtle villain has dressed up as a dashing gentleman and a worthy businessman and a philanthropist and a saint. But the loud checks of a comical little cad were really rather a new disguise. But the disguise must be very irksome to a man who can really do things. This is a very dexterous little cosmopolitan gutter snipe who can do scores of things, not only shoot, but draw and paint, and probably play the fiddle. Now a man like that may find the hiding of his talents useful, but he could never help wanting to use them where they were useless. If he can draw, he will draw absent-mindedly on blotting paper. I suspect this rascal has often drawn poor old Puggy's face on blotting paper. Probably he began doing it in blots as he afterward did it in dots, or rather shots. It was the same sort of thing. He found a disused target in a deserted yard and couldn't resist indulging in a little secret shooting, like secret drinking. You thought the shots all scattered and irregular, and so they were, but not accidental. No two distances were alike, but the different points were exactly where he wanted to put them. There's nothing needs such mathematical precision as a wild caricature. I've dabbed a little in drawing myself, and I assure you that to put one dot where you want it is a marvel with a pen close to a piece of paper. It was a miracle to do it across a garden with a gun, but a man who can work those miracles will always itch to work them if it's only in the dark. After a pause, March observed thoughtfully, "But he couldn't have brought him down like a bird with one of those little guns?" "No, that was why I went into the gun room," replied Fisher. "He did it with one of Burke's rifles, and Burke thought he knew the sound of it. That's why he rushed out without a hat, looking so wild. He saw nothing but a car passing quickly, which he followed for a little way, and then concluded he had made a mistake." There was another silence, during which Fisher sat on a great stone, as motionless as on their first meeting, and watched the grey and silver river eddying past under the bushes. Then March said, abruptly, "Of course he knows the truth now." "Nobody knows the truth but you and I," answered Fisher, with a certain softening in his voice. "And I don't think you and I will ever quarrel." "What do you mean?" asked March in an altered accent. "What have you done about it?" Hornfisher continued to gaze steadily at the eddying stream. At last he said, "The police have proved it was a motor accident." "But you know it was not." "I told you that I know too much," replied Fisher, with his eye on the river. "I know that, and I know a great many other things. I know the atmosphere and the way the whole thing works. I know this fellow has succeeded in making himself something incurably commonplace and comic. I know you can't get up a persecution of old Toole or little Tetch. If I were to tell Hoggs or Halkett that old Jink was an assassin, they would almost die of laughter before my eyes. Oh, I don't say that laughter is quite innocent, though it's genuine in its way. They want old Jink, and they couldn't do it without him. I don't say I'm quite innocent. I like Hoggs. I don't want him to be down and out, and he'd be done for it if Jink can't pay for his coronet. They were devilish near the line at the last election, but the only real objection to it is that it's impossible. Nobody would believe it. It's not in the picture. The crooked weathercock would always turn it into a joke." "Don't you think this is infamous?" asked March quietly. "I think a good many things," replied the other. "If few people ever happen to blow the whole tangle of society to hell with dynamite, I don't know that the human race will be much the worse. But don't be too hard on me merely because I know what society is. That's why I moon away my time over things like stinking fish." There was a pause as he settled himself down again by the stream, and then he added, "I told you before, I had to throw back the big fish." Chapter 2, Part 1. This tale begins among a tangle of tales around a name that is at once recent and legendary. The name is that of Michael O'Neill, popularly called Prince Michael, partly because he claimed descent from ancient Fenian princes, and partly because he was credited with a plan to make himself Prince President of Ireland, as the last Napoleon did of France. He was undoubtedly a gentleman of honorable pedigree and of many accomplishments, but two of his accomplishments emerged from all the rest. He had a talent for appearing when he was not wanted and a talent for disappearing when he was wanted, especially when he was wanted by the police. It may be added that his disappearances were more dangerous than his appearances. In the latter, he seldom went beyond the sensational, passing up seditious placards, tearing down official placards, making flamboyant speeches, or unfurling forbidden flags. But in order to effect the former, he would sometimes fight for his freedom with startling energy, from which men were sometimes lucky to escape with a broken head instead of a broken neck. His most famous feats of escape, however, were due to dexterity and not to violence. On a cloudless summer morning, he had come down a country road white with dust, and passing out a farmhouse, he had told the farmer's daughter with elegant indifference that the local police were in pursuit of him. The girl's name was Bridget Royce, a somber and even sullen type of beauty, and she looked at him darkly, as if in doubt, and said, "Do you want me to hide you?" Upon which he only laughed, leaped lightly over the stone wall, and strode toward the farm, merely throwing over his shoulder the remark, "Thank you, I've generally been capable of hiding myself," in which proceeding he acted with a tragic ignorance of the nature of women, and there fell on his path in that sunshine a shadow of doom. While he disappeared through the farmhouse, the girl remained for a few moments looking up the road, and two perspiring policemen came plowing up to the door where she stood. Though still angry, she was still silent, and a quarter of an hour later the officer had searched the house and were already inspecting the kitchen garden and cornfield behind it. In the ugly reaction of her mood, she might have been tempted even to point out the fugitive, but for a small difficulty that she had no more notion than the policeman had of where he could possibly have gone. The kitchen garden was enclosed by a very low wall, and the cornfield beyond lay aslant like a square patch on a great green hill, on which he could still have been seen even as a dot in the distance. Everything stood solid in its familiar place. The apple tree was so small to support or hide a climber. The only shed stood open and obviously empty. There was no sound save the droning of summer flies and the occasional flutter of a bird, unfamiliar enough to be surprised by the scarecrow in the field. There was scarcely a shadow save a few blue lines that fell from the thin tree. Every detail was picked up by the brilliant daylight as if in a microscope. The girl described the scene later with all the passionate realism of her race, and whether or no the policeman had a similar eye for the picturesque, they had at least an eye for the facts of the case, and were compelled to give up the chase and retire from the scene.
So hope you guys had fun. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel for more interesting audiobooks.